Isn't it true that you want to fly commercial so that you can fly in luxury? How much money did you pay for Tyler Perry's Gulfstream jet, for example?
Well, for example, that's really none of your business.
Faith is supposed to bring hope, healing, and truth. But some preachers turned that trust into a business, asking people to give, believe, obey, and stay silent, while money, fame, and power grew behind the pulpit. In this video, we will uncover 10 famous religious leaders who built huge empires, faced public scandals, and were exposed through lawsuits, investigations, media reports, and former insiders. Their public image looked holy, but their private actions told a very different story. 10. Paul Crouch. Paul Crouch did not start with private jets, luxury homes, or a global television empire. In the early days, he presented himself as a man with a mission. Alongside his wife, Jan, he launched Trinity Broadcasting Network, better known as TBN, with the goal of bringing Christian programming into homes across America. What began as a single television station eventually expanded into one of the largest religious broadcasting networks in the world. Millions tuned in daily. Donations poured in. And with every year, the ministry became bigger, richer, and more influential. But as TBN grew, so did questions about where the money was going. Critics pointed to the lavish lifestyles enjoyed by members of the Crouch family. Reports described luxury homes, expensive travel, and personal perks that seemed far removed from the humble image often promoted on screen. Former insiders claimed the network operated more like a family-controlled corporation than a ministry. To supporters, the success reflected God's blessing. To critics, it looked like donor money was funding a life of extraordinary comfort. The controversy intensified when whistleblower allegations emerged from within the organization itself. Former employees and even family members raised concerns about financial practices and the handling of sensitive matters behind closed doors. Claims surfaced that large sums of charitable funds had been used in questionable ways. While many allegations were strongly denied, they fueled growing skepticism about the network's leadership and transparency. Despite years of criticism, TBN survived every storm. Paul Crouch remained at the center of the empire until his death, leaving behind a legacy that remains deeply divided. Some remember a pioneer of Christian television. Others see a powerful figure whose ministry raised troubling questions about faith, money, and accountability. And while Paul Crouch built a kingdom through television, the next preacher built his empire through power, image, and fear. Then 4 young men stepped forward, and everything changed. 9. Eddie Long. Eddie Long helped build one of the most forceful church empires in America, or at least that's how it looked from the outside. As the leader of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church just outside Atlanta, he pulled in thousands of people every week and, over time, became one of those most recognizable religious figures in the whole country. His messages were loud and energized. His reach went well past the church walls, and his day-to-day life seemed to match big success. Long rolled around in luxury vehicles, wore pricey suits, and he moved easily among politicians, celebrities, and other community leaders. To a lot of supporters, he felt like a symbol of grit, careful discipline, and spiritual authority. But that picture started to crack around 2010, when several young men filed lawsuits against him. The claims were, in a way, hard to ignore. The men said they were former church members, and that Long used his role and his influence to form unusually close relationships with them when they were still young. In the lawsuits, the narrative was that gifts, trips, and special attention were supposedly used to engineer scenarios that crossed clear boundaries. Before long, the allegations turned into national headlines, and Long found himself facing intense public scrutiny. What made the controversy even more damaging was his response, honestly. Long denied the accusations, but then kind of sidestepped, talking straight at many of the particular points. And as the pressure kept rising, the legal battle carried on in the background, behind closed doors, you know. In the end, the lawsuits got settled privately. Still, the specifics were never really fully shared with the public, so a lot of what people wondered about stayed up in the air. Since there wasn't a public trial, supporters and critics were kind of left to piece things together on their own, like whatever they wanted to believe. Even with that, Long stayed in ministry for a while, but the whole scandal, it permanently changed the way folks saw him. Membership went down, public confidence grew weaker, and the image he worked on for decades never quite returned to the same condition. For many observers, his fall started to look like a plain example of what can happen when authority, reach, and responsibility stop being balanced. 8. Peter Popoff. Peter Popoff became one of the most recognizable televangelists in America by convincing audiences that he possessed extraordinary spiritual gifts. During packed revival meetings, he appeared to know intimate details about complete strangers. He would call people out from the crowd, reveal their names, addresses, illnesses, and personal struggles, then present the information as divine knowledge. To believers, it looked like a miracle unfolding in real time. Donations surged as viewers became convinced they were witnessing genuine supernatural power. The illusion began to unravel in the mid-1980s when magician and skeptic James Randi decided to investigate. Using a radio scanner during one of Popoff's events, Randi intercepted transmissions being sent directly to Popoff through a hidden earpiece. The voice belonged to Popoff's wife, Elizabeth, who was reading information gathered from prayer cards filled out by attendees before the service. The shocking recordings were later broadcast to a national audience, revealing that the so-called divine revelations were actually carefully collected personal details. The exposure damaged Popoff's credibility and led to a dramatic collapse of his ministry. Many assumed that would be the end of his career. It wasn't. Years later, Popoff quietly returned to television with a new strategy. Instead of focusing entirely on live miracles, he promoted products such as miracle spring water and special blessing items that promised financial breakthroughs and healing. Despite his highly publicized exposure, a new generation of viewers embraced his message. Remarkably, Popoff rebuilt a profitable ministry, proving that even after one of televangelism's most famous scandals, belief can still be a powerful business. 7. Jim Bakker. Jim Bakker seemed like he had it all. I mean, everything a televangelist could sorta dream about. With his wife Tammy Faye, he managed to grow the PTL network into this major religious broadcasting force, the kind that showed up in millions of living rooms across America. But TV was only one slice of the whole thing. Bakker also pushed Heritage USA, which was a gigantic Christian resort, plus a theme park, and it brought in huge crowds year after year. When it was really at its peak, that place basically became one of the most crowded destinations in the country. Supporters claimed this was kinda evidence that faith could turn into something truly extraordinary, not just in spirit, but also in reality. Donations kept coming in all the time, which helped the operation expand fast and get more and more extravagant. Still, the picture of success started to crack, mostly in the late 1980s. Stories came out about hush money tied to a former church employee, and that alone set off heavy media attention. Then, as investigators went further, they ran into even more serious issues. Federal authorities said Bakker misled supporters and also used ministry money in ways that weren't right. There were thousands of donors who had bought lifetime partnerships, and those deals promised perks that the ministry could never really deliver. Prosecutors argued that millions of dollars were going toward personal comforts and all kinds of expenses, while supporters thought their contributions were going to real ministry work. The whole scandal blew up into one of the most well-known religious arguments in American history, really. Bakker was later convicted on several counts of fraud and conspiracy, and that part was pretty serious. He got a long prison sentence, but he ended up serving less time than they originally planned. His empire kind of unraveled, PTL fell apart, and Heritage USA declined fast, like really fast. Lots of folks assumed his public career was over for good. Still, after he left prison, Bakker slowly came back to religious broadcasting. Even if he never really recovered that old dominance, he still picked up a different audience, and in that way he showed that after a huge public collapse, some televangelists can still manage to return to the screen. 6. Jimmy Swaggart. During the 1980s, few religious figures were more influential than Jimmy Swaggart. His fiery sermons, emotional delivery, and powerful television presence helped him build one of the largest televangelist audiences in the world. Millions watched his broadcasts every week, and donations poured into his ministry from supporters who believed he was a fearless defender of moral values. Swaggart built his reputation by speaking forcefully against sin and warning audiences about the dangers of temptation, corruption, and personal failure. To many believers, he represented a strong spiritual voice in a rapidly changing culture. That image began to collapse in 1988. Swaggart had spent years publicly criticizing other religious leaders for their moral shortcomings, which made the scandal that followed even more shocking. Investigators uncovered evidence linking him to behavior that directly contradicted the standards he preached from the pulpit. The revelation stunned supporters and instantly became national news. Suddenly, the man who had spent years condemning moral failure found himself facing accusations that exposed a dramatic gap between his public message and private actions. The fallout produced one of the most memorable moments in television history. Standing before his congregation and cameras, Swaggart delivered a tearful confession that would be replayed for years. His emotional statement became a symbol of both public shame and public spectacle. While some viewers saw genuine remorse, others viewed it as an attempt to save a collapsing ministry. Although the scandal severely damaged his reputation, Swaggart continued preaching and broadcasting. Yet for many people, his legacy remains tied to that unforgettable confession and the hypocrisy that transformed one of America's most powerful televangelists into a cautionary tale. By this point, the pattern is hard to ignore. Money, fame, secrets, and carefully staged regret. But the next names took the prosperity message even further, turning giving into a promise of wealth. 5. Creflo Dollar. Creflo Dollar built his whole ministry around a message that seemed to click with millions of people. Instead of like preachers who keep hammering on sacrifice or hardship only, Dollar basically taught that financial success can be read as a kind of divine nod. His sermons talked up prosperity, abundance, and the belief that believers can somehow open up blessings through faith plus giving. And as his audience kept growing, his reach kept expanding too, not just locally, but everywhere. His church turned into this huge organization. His television broadcasts showed up for viewers worldwide, and his name started getting linked real tightly to the prosperity gospel movement. Then, with all that visibility, came the extra scrutiny. Critics started asking pretty directly if the lifestyle being promoted from the pulpit actually matched what many supporters could realistically afford. The questions got louder once a Senate investigation looked into a handful of well-known televangelists and how they used ministry money. Dollar ended up being one of the names put under the brightest light. Investigators wanted records and explanations about luxury spending, personal benefits, and whether financial transparency was being handled in a clean, open way inside large religious organizations. Even though the Senate inquiry did not lead to any criminal charges, it still ignited a bigger public argument about whether some ministries were running more like businesses than places of worship. 4. Kenneth Copeland. Kenneth Copeland transformed himself from a preacher into one of the most recognizable faces of the prosperity gospel movement. For decades, he taught that faith and financial success were deeply connected. According to his message, believers who trusted God and gave generously could expect abundance in return. That teaching attracted a devoted following and helped build a massive ministry empire. Over time, Copeland accumulated enormous influence, operating a global media network, large ministry facilities, and a lifestyle that reflected extraordinary wealth. To supporters, he was living proof that his teachings worked. To critics, he became the ultimate example of religion being used to justify luxury. Much of the controversy surrounding Copeland focused on his collection of private jets and high-end lifestyle. While many religious leaders attempted to avoid discussing personal wealth, Copeland openly defended it. He argued that private aircraft were necessary tools for ministry and allowed him to travel efficiently while spreading his message. Critics were unconvinced. They questioned whether such expensive assets were truly essential for religious work, especially when many supporters struggled financially while continuing to donate to his organization. 3. Carl Lentz. Carl Lentz kinda didn't really fit the classic picture of a pastor. He wore designer clothes, had tattoos, talked in this casual way, and somehow moved around celebrities, athletes, and influencers like it was no big deal. As the leader of Hillsong NYC, he ended up being one of the most recognizable religious voices of his era. The church pulled in massive crowds, especially younger people who felt kind of disconnected from the older religious systems. Service nights felt modern, energetic, and honestly very well planned, like they were built for a different kind of audience. And through social media, celebrity friendships, plus this constant public spotlight, Lentz helped turn Hillsong into a real cultural thing, a phenomenon. His climb was tied to image, more than it maybe should have been. Unlike a lot of church leaders who came before him, Lentz leaned into fame rather than trying to dodge it. High-profile relationships with celebrities brought serious attention, and it lifted both the church and his own personal brand. People started calling him Pastor to the Stars. He showed up in magazines, did interviews, and got talked about online way outside normal religious conversation. For supporters, he looked like a fresh route to faith. For critics, the heavier emphasis on image, rank, and celebrity culture raised worries that the ministry might be drifting toward influence more than spiritual leadership. 2. Benny Hinn. Benny Hinn became one of the most famous faith healers in the world through massive miracle crusades that attracted thousands of people at a time. His events were dramatic, emotional, and unforgettable. Crowds packed arenas, hoping to witness healing from serious illnesses, chronic pain, and lifelong conditions. During these services, people often fell to the ground, cried, shouted, or claimed they had been instantly healed. Television broadcasts carried these moments across the globe, helping Hinn build a ministry that reached millions. To supporters, he appeared to possess an extraordinary spiritual gift. To critics, the events looked more like carefully staged performances. As his popularity grew, so did skepticism. Journalists, medical experts, and investigators began examining the claims made during his crusades. Several reports questioned whether some of the highly publicized healings could actually be verified. In some cases, individuals who claimed dramatic recoveries later reported continued health problems. Former insiders also raised concerns about how certain testimonies were selected and presented to audiences. While Hinn consistently denied wrongdoing and defended his ministry, the questions never fully disappeared. Instead, they followed him throughout much of his career. Even today, Benny Hinn remains a deeply divisive figure. For some, he represents hope. For others, he represents one of televangelism's most enduring controversies. And now we reach the preacher, whose fall exposed one of the sharpest gaps between public preaching and private behavior. He stood as a moral voice for millions until one man went on the radio and pulled the mask off. 1. Ted Haggard. Ted Haggard was once sort of seen as one of those most influential evangelical leaders in America. He founded New Life Church in Colorado Springs, and over time, he built a congregation that stretched into the thousands, becoming a big force inside modern Christianity. And honestly, his influence went way beyond the church walls, too. Haggard would show up in national media a lot. He advised political leaders, and later he became president of the National Association of Evangelicals. That gave him this loud voice, reaching millions of believers across the country. To supporters, he basically stood for firm direction, traditional values, and a clear moral compass. A lot of how people pictured Haggard was tied to family values and personal restraint. He talked often about marriage, morality, and the value of living in line with biblical principles. His sermons and public appearances had this steady certainty, like everything was straightforward. So when the scandal came, it hit harder than you'd expect. In 2006, reports surfaced that Haggard had done things that went directly against the standards he had pushed for years. The claims included substance use and improper encounters, and just like that, he became the center of a national argument with everyone watching and no one looking away. At first, Haggard denied the allegations like it was all misread or maybe exaggerated, but after more info started showing up, his stance got harder and harder to hold together, you know. The story kinda swallowed the headlines, and the pressure rose from both church leaders and the wider public, all at once. In just a few days, he resigned from his leadership roles and stepped away from the church he had spent years building, really quietly at first, then not so much. And there you have it, 10 preachers whose careers were rocked by scandal, controversy, and shocking revelations. Which case shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. And if you're ready for more unbelievable scandals, hidden secrets, and dramatic downfalls, click on the next video on your screen right now. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.